Hello, this week is slightly different because in church on Sunday I'm going to be talking about Mind the Gap. Now, Mind the Gap is a ministry that I set up about 5 years ago, and it's something that I'm now working on full time. Mind the Gap is there simply to create excellent environments for people to bump into Jesus, to allow him to do what only he can do. In April the 11th, 1970, NASA launched its Apollo 13 space mission. It's now a famous story of what happened on that mission because 2 days later an oxygen tank exploded and the crew suddenly had a new mission. The three-man crew's mission changed. The mission was aborted. And there's a famous line which simply I think all of us know: Houston, we have a problem. The crew's mission to land on the moon was now replaced with new orders. For the crew and the team at NASA, the new orders were simply this: get the crew back safely. One purpose, one mission. And they had no plan or ideas how to do this because they had never had to cope before and they'd never trained for an oxygen tank exploding. Someone asked the chief flight director, Eugene Kranz, is this going to be NASA's darkest moment? And he said, no, this is going to be our finest hour. So I want to start this morning by simply saying this. I think that we at the moment are facing a problem as church and as Christian communities. But I believe that these problems are also opportunities. And just like those famous words at NASA, Houston, we have a problem, I'd love to say this morning, church, we have a problem. But I also believe that this can be our finest hour. So let me just start by introducing you to what I think is some of the issues that we face, and then talking to you slightly about actually Mind the Gap Ministries and what I'm there and what I believe God has called me to do. Some recent research from the Briary Consultancy has shown that there has been a dramatic decline in church attendance. There was 11.5% of the UK population that attended church regularly in 1980, less than 5% in 2015, and this has now gone dramatically lower to what some are arguing is less than 3%. And there's lots of different reasons for this, and it's easy to think that we're doing okay. You see, we have a large church and there's plenty of people here on a Sunday morning. But if we're really honest with ourselves, we're not back to pre-COVID levels. And we need to perhaps ask ourselves why. Well, during the COVID pandemic, a researcher, Christopher Alan Lewis, using a Myers-Briggs model, has updated some research that he's done before. Now, Myers-Briggs is a business tool, and it's used by asking a section of random questions to try and ascertain the type of person you are. And some of you will be familiar with it. If you're not, the way that they do it is there's a number of Myers-Briggs categories, and each category is denoted by 4 letters. The research that he did suggested this, that 70% of churchgoers are Myers-Briggs type ISFJ, introvert, sensing, feeling, judging. What he then went on to look at is the number of people in a typical Sunday church that are close to that Myers-Briggs type. So there's another 4 types that are close to that. And if you take those types into consideration, it actually goes up to 90% of people attending church. Different denominations are slightly different, but I think it's a startling piece of evidence to show that actually church tends to attract a certain type of people. Well, we need to ask ourselves, how is this representative of the UK population? Well, interestingly, when you look at the UK population, there is only 6% of the UK population which are ISFJ on the Myers-Briggs scale. Doesn't that look very similar to the 5, maybe 3% that regularly attend a church service? So it's really easy, isn't it, to conclude that we need to change. But when an organisation has a dominance of a certain type of person, it's very hard to change because, you see, we like things a certain way. We think like each other. and what we do works for us and we like it. We know how to do it and it suits us. And I think that's all understandable. So let's keep doing what we're doing. Let's do it really, really well. But let me start by saying this. Sunday church works for many. And if you're here this morning, or if you're watching this video, it's probably because you love what we do here on a Sunday and in this organisation we call Dorchester Baptist Church. And that's great. You see, you're probably one of the 6% or close to the 6% of the UK population that likes what happens in a typical church on a Sunday morning. Let's keep doing this. Let's do more of this. And let's do it all to the very best of our ability and resource. But could I just suggest this morning that there are around 95% of the UK population that however well we do what we do on a Sunday morning, it will never give them what they need. It will never allow them to meet Jesus simply because they aren't like you. So this is why I set up Mind the Gap Ministries. It's my full-time Christian ministry. It is to try to the best of my ability to address some of these issues by simply creating excellent environments where people can bump into Jesus and allow him to do what only he can do. And maybe we need to recognise that our Sunday services won't work for everyone, but rather than try and fit square pegs in round holes, perhaps it's okay to have multiple ways by which we can create those excellent environments to allow people to encounter Jesus and allow him to do what only he can do. And what we do here on a Sunday morning is just one of those ways. But we need to also create some other environments. So I'm just going to briefly explain some of the things that I've set up, some of the things that I'm involved in. Let me tell you about Mind the Gap Ministries. Well, it first started around 20 years ago when my wife Louise and I started a thing we call pub church. And the thing about pub church is this: it's not simply church in a pub, it was something very different. Pub church was a place where people could come to a neutral space, a pub, a very natural place to meet up, and they could share their ideas and share their thoughts. They could share life together and they could talk about the things that mattered most to them. But they could do it in a way where there were a couple of Christians, me and Lou, and a couple of friends, Skip and Julie, that were there to also tell them about their life and to tell them about their faith. And so we shared time together. It took a long time to get established. It was probably about a year before anyone wanted to come and join us. But when they did, things really took off. And we did all sorts of different things. We launched it at the CVM gathering. We had t-shirts made which simply said on the back, "If Carlsberg did church." And here in this picture you can see some of the original group. I want to introduce you to one of the couples that came along not that long after we'd started. A couple called Mark and Shell.
First met Paul through being introduced through friends, and we all instantly gelled. We get on, we like to see each other socially. The subject of God inevitably comes up. We ask lots of questions, although we're not overly religious. Personally, I'm not overly religious, but we like to ask questions, and Paul is always happy to spend time answering them for us.
Hi, I'm Mark. I've known Paul now for about 8 to 10 years, and when we first got to know each other, I had no interest in going to church at all. In the time though that we've been together, we've all got the same interests, so I like walking, kayaking, and we've done a lot of that in the past. And in that time, Paul's sort of like given me an idea what Christianity is all about. I wouldn't say that I'm big into going to church, but Shelley and I, my wife, we do go to church on the odd occasion when we're asked to go, and he's given me an insight into what it's all about.
As a spin-off to Pub Church, I then started a thing that I called Encounter Weekends. Encounter Weekends, we used a friend's cottage on Exmoor, and we would go and we would stay for weekends, and we would walk, we would eat curries, we would drink beer. But at one point in the weekend, the guys that came along were told before they came, at one point in the weekend we would take at least an hour to discuss spiritual things. And we did this in numerous ways. Sometimes we did it when we were out on the walk, sometimes we did it over a meal, we even did it once during breakfast as what we as Christians would perhaps call our quiet time. And it was simply a way to allow the non-Christians that came along to hear about and encounter something of God. And we had great fun doing this. We did this for many years, and we extended those. So sometimes they walked on Exmoor, but sometimes we went to other places. We went once to a thing called the CVM Gathering, which is a big camp in Swindon, a Christian organised camp, and some of the guys came along to that as well. And these were great things to do. Now, when people hear a lot of this, they automatically, and I think a lot of people think, well, Paul, he's an evangelist. And whilst it's true that a lot of my passion is to see those that don't know Jesus get to know Jesus, actually, I wouldn't describe myself as an evangelist. Actually, if anyone were to ask, I would simply say this: I'm a disciple maker. Because you see, there are a number of things that I do that involve Christians and activities centred around church communities. One of those is called Bold Encounter. Bold Encounter is a day event. Mainly they've been held up in London, but we're looking to do one in September, October down in Dorchester. And I do it with my friend Simon. You can see Simon in the picture here. And Bold Encounter is a day where men come to encounter God. And we are simply, Simon and I, facilitators. We do create an environment where people can meet with Jesus and hear from him, and for him to do what only he can do. That's what Bold Encounter is all about. But you also know, possibly some of you, if you were at church when I launched the project here in Dorchester Baptist Church, that I also have a project called Why Did That Just Happen? The Why Did That Just Happen project is a project where an individual has a little business card. They simply buy someone a coffee and give them the card, and the card explains why they bought them a coffee, simply because they're a Christian and they wanted to do something for someone else. And the project is really taking off. This week, actually, I've had an order for 500 cards from a large church in London. And I have a contact in another church in London that also wants a similar amount of cards. And we're using it as part of what we do in Bold Encounter Days. We're using it within churches. It's really taken off. In January, I'm speaking at a J. John conference and promoting the idea further there. So I'm looking forward to seeing what might happen through that. So that's another exciting thing I'm involved in, that actually through just a simple act of buying a coffee, giving someone a card, people can encounter Jesus, and hopefully he will do what only he can do. And then there's the Quest events that I'm involved in. I first got involved in Quest through my friend Scott, and Scott invited me to go to Texas to go on my own Quest event. It's a week-long event, and I went over to Texas some years ago and I did a Quest, and I have to say I encountered Jesus in a way that I never had before. For so much of my life I had actually experienced and had to deal with all sorts of fear issues, and during my Quest event, through what Jesus did with me in that event, actually that has been resolved and sorted, and I no longer have those fear thoughts and fear issues that I once had. It is an amazing thing, and we have done about 4 in the UK, and we're looking to do more each year, possibly doing 1 later this year and 2 into next year. They're quite a big commitment, but they really are exciting, and I don't think there is a single guy that's come on a Quest event who hasn't had their life changed dramatically because of what Jesus has done. But in addition to all of those things that I'm involved in, and there's all sorts of other things that I do, I'm also an elder here at Dorchester Baptist Church, because actually I want to be part of an organisation, a Christian organisation, the organisation that we call Dorchester Baptist Church. So whilst a lot of what I do takes me away from what I call Sunday church, a lot of what I do means that I'm not able to physically be here often on a Sunday. Nevertheless, I am a part of this community, and looking to extend this community's reach into other places with perhaps those 95% that may not typically come to a Sunday morning service. We are typical of many churches across this country. We have our Sunday service where a lot of focus and a lot of our effort is put into us coming together to worship God, to learn from God's word, to be together on that Sunday morning, and that's a great thing to do. But as I said earlier, I think, Houston, we do have a problem, because I think there are an awful lot of people that, irrespective of how well we do that perhaps is not going to engage with them, which is why I'm doing what I do with Mind the Gap. That's why I'm often not here on a Sunday morning. Well, I think we need to carry on doing those things. We need to do them, and we need to do them to the best of our ability. And we have all sorts of activities going on, don't we? We have all sorts of different things that go on typically here and based around this church during the week. We have our small groups, we have Cafe Refresh, we have Kids and Co, we have Food Bank, we have all sorts of different things going on. And those are all great things. But I want to introduce you to a new thing that I simply call microchurch. Earlier I spoke about the dominance of a similar people type that typically attend a church service. And this is the point where actually I'm at risk of offending, and that's certainly not my intention, but I want to be very clear in what I believe needs to happen. You see, in our context in Dorchester, we have several churches. We have our own church, Dorchester Baptist Church, but then there are other churches. We can name some of them, I'm sure, and I'm not going to on this video. But we have other churches that actually, if we're honest, when we really look closely, they are doing very similar things to what we're doing. In fact, most churches, and actually it's been my experience that most churches I attend, whether in Dorchester or across the country, are typically doing the same sorts of things. They're typically a church where you will experience worship, which is sung worship, played by a group at the front, and we love that, and let's not change that, but that's not going to do it for everyone. Typically a Sunday church will have someone who will read a passage of scripture and preach and share their thoughts and their ideas on what God's word is saying through the passage that we're looking at. And if we're doing that well, we often will follow that up in our small groups in the week where we talk about what we have looked at on a Sunday. And those are all good things. Please don't hear me wrong. I'm not saying we need to change or get rid of those things. Those things have served you and have served me well for many, many years. But I think there is another way, an addition that is needed. And it's simply what I call microchurch. So what is microchurch? Well, microchurch is a church. Microchurch is not simply a route to a Sunday service. Microchurches are going to inevitably be very creative and imaginative, and I'll give you some examples in a minute. Microchurches may well be very small. So the sorts of things I'm talking about here, the things that I've come across. There's a microchurch that I've come across called Worship Through Art. And this is where artists who love doing art have come together and through their art are expressing worship and hearing and encountering God through the art that they do. What I love about Worship Through Art is the artists that go, not all of them are Christians, but they're being drawn into an environment where some of the guys are Christians, and as they do their art and as they express themselves through their art, God becomes very much a part of their conversation. They've created an environment where people bump into Jesus and allow him to do what only he can do. Now, I can't imagine, for me personally, anything worse. My drawings are like little spider drawings. There's no way I think that I could worship through art. But for those that attend, it has become a very special gathering and a very special place for them to be. Pub church actually was a micro church. We never set it out to be that way, but that's what it became, because pub church only really worked when there was a small group of people meeting. You can't share life in an intimate way with non-Christians when there's 20, 30, maybe 50 people. So pub church actually never really grew above 15 people. But for those 15 people, it was a place where they could be themselves. It was a place of honesty. It was a place to be real. It was a place to be open and share what was going on in your life. And it was a privilege for Louise and I and Skip and Julie to be able to at times pray with the guys when life was tough. It was a privilege for us to be able to share with them some of our own story of what Jesus means to us. And you've seen from Mark and Charles' own testimony earlier how much of an effect that had. We've now actually just started another micro church. It's called Walking Church. And Walking Church, we've started just a small group of us. It's very early days, but Walking Church is for those that don't typically attend a church service. So primarily I think that's going to be for non-Christians. For people that perhaps through the COVID pandemic or whatever circumstance of life have decided that they want to know more about some sort of faith things. They want to explore that for themselves. And they can come along to Walking Church, and typically we start with a short prayer. We walk for a bit, then we read a story from the Bible. We then put the story in our own words. And then as we continue to walk, we ask ourselves 2 questions. What does the story we've just read this morning tell us about God? And what does the story tell us about people? And we've met a few times now. We'll keep you updated on how that goes. We've been inspired by a couple, Nick and Naomi from Swanage. Now they've been doing their Walking Church for about 4 years now. And I've been regularly meeting with Nick, and we've been sharing ideas and talking about how Walking Church is done and different ideas. And we've now launched a website, and we're launching Walking Church nationally. So anyone that would want to get involved, irrespective of where they are across the country, can have a page on our Walking Church website. And we can link people together. People can come and inquire, well, where can I find a Walking Church? And we'll be able to direct them to a Walking Church near them. Romans 12 is a very familiar passage to many of us. It talks about parts of the body and how the different parts come together but are still uniquely different. And it's often preached to bring us together. And I think it's right, and I think that is the purpose of the passage, to allow us to understand that we are all distinctly different, but actually through our faith we come together, and by coming together we are stronger. But I don't believe that coming together necessarily means we all have to be in the same building at the same time doing the same things. Some of us, I believe, will be used to be creative, to start new micro churches. And what happens then, I believe, is that instead of church just being like other churches, our church, Dorchester Baptist Church, can actually have a number of micro churches associated with it. And so whilst attendance on a Sunday morning may not grow, our community, our organisation grows. God's kingdom grows. And I'm simply looking through Mind the Gap to do that, to help others where I can, to come up with ideas, to step into those ideas. And for me, the success is this: an individual that hears from God and then steps into that God has for them. Whether that be a non-Christian experiencing God for the first time, whether that be someone who's deeply rooted in church community but actually wants to do more within that community, or whether, and I think this won't be quite so many people, whether that is someone that has an idea, a very creative idea, to do something very different, and that may well become a micro church. So that is Mind the Gap Ministries. And when I said earlier that Houston, we have a problem, I believe that actually since the COVID pandemic, church communities like ours have started to wake up to the fact that there are many opportunities out there. We are going to do all sorts of different things, many of which will be here on a Sunday morning in our church building, many of which will be in the week using the church building's facilities. But I believe there's also going to be numerous things that will occur in the community, like pub church, like worship through art, like Walking Church, and many other things. And that's what I'm passionate about, that's what I'm excited about, and that's what I'm here to promote through Mind the Gap. Any point get in touch. I'm happy to share thoughts with people, to resource through web pages and whatever ways I can, videos, whatever it might be. And we see together the opportunities that God is going to set before us. Thanks for taking time to listen.